money has evolved and our relationship with money has evolved, I think, so rapidly over the last 10 or 15 years. And I talk about kind of modern retirements. I think people retiring now are first generation, like retirement rebels, as I've called them, right? These are people that are retiring in a way that has never been done before. Our relationship with money is so materially different now because of what a modern society is doing to us. It's a noisy, full on, always on, comparative led world that is now, I think, is really challenging for people. And so our work as human first financial planners and your work as trained financial therapists, I think are going to be as important, like more important than they've ever been.
Welcome to the Healthy Love and Money podcast. If you find money to be the number 1, 2, or even third largest source of stress in your relationship, then you're in the right place. Going beyond how to budget, invest, and do your taxes, we're going to explore financial intimacy. Discover how to talk with your partner about your shared financial life. Let's take the awkward and painful out of money conversations. Join me and hit follow to listen to weekly inspiring, healing, and motivating interviews with financial therapists, couples therapists, and financial planners, and so many more. Let's go on the journey of financial intimacy together. Today, I have a very special guest. He comes all the way from across the pond in the UK. His name is Dan Haylett, and we got to meet recently because I reached out to him and I was like, hey, Dan, your podcast looks really cool. I want to talk about couples and money. He's like, yeah, sure. Come on, let's do it. And I was like, oh, that's so cool. Thank you. And then we got to meet at a professional conference called Shift. And Dan was so much fun to be a guest on his podcast. And then he was even more fun in person. I was like, Dan, you've got to come to the Healthy Love and Money podcast and talk about your work. So your podcast is called the Humans vs. Retirement podcast. And there's a whole website around it. And we're going to unpack what a great resource that is for folks today. Dan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ed. Much appreciated. I've got to live up to the fun tag now. So let's have some fun. So I hope I'm as much fun on this as I've been elsewhere with you. So yeah, we've had some amazing conversations over the last good couple of months in person and on podcasts and stuff. So can't wait to dig into this with you.
Yeah, that's what I appreciate is, Dan, you've become, I hope you take this as a sincere compliment, a super nerd around humans and retirement. But I don't imagine when you were 5, 6 years old that that's what you were thinking your life would turn into. So can you take us a little bit on your journey to how you have a leading top 50 investing podcast, the Humans vs. Retirement? How did you get there? What took you on this journey?
Oh, no, I had this vision when I was 10, Ed. I've had it all along, right? So I'm one of those really unique people that had it. No, I'm joking. So do you know what? There's a very long version to kind of the life and the journey, right? And I won't bore you or your listeners with it. But ultimately, my first love, I'm a massive sports fan, right? I love sport. I'm a sportsman in terms of mindset and kind of competitiveness and everything that goes with it. So I've played sport from a young age. And I was on a pathway to actually play professionally over here in a wonderfully English sport called cricket. So many of you won't understand what it is. And it's kind of hitting a ball with a bat, but it's not baseball. But yeah, and actually the Americans don't get it. And I get it. I get why Americans don't get it. Because over here, you can play for 5 days and still end up in a draw. So the whole concept of cricket is kind of just ridiculous. So, I played cricket. I played golf to a pretty decent standard. And I kind of was on a pathway throughout teenage years to think about I was going to have a career in sport, whether it was playing or teaching or coaching or kind of whatever. And I had a couple of setbacks with that that kind of made me kind of step away, setbacks and life becoming a bit more serious, like girlfriends and mortgages and houses and children and things like that. So you kind of think at some point I'm going to have to grow up and get a proper job. But actually what was really interesting, if I look back now and put myself in that mindset, I was leading and of authority at a very young age in these sports. So for instance, in my cricket team, I was the captain of our first team playing in a really big league here when I was 17 years old. I was the youngest ever captain of the first team. Right? So I was 17, leading and, trying to get a group of really good cricketers in their 20s, 30s and 40s that were listening to what I had to say. Right. So, and it never really dawned on me. I was just being me, and I kind of been doing that. So throughout my kind of school life and my young sporting career, I was definitely seen as the person that could lead this and was listened to and felt like that people would kind of follow my lead. So when I decided to get a proper job, it was kind of, I wanted to take those things in. I felt like I could communicate to a whole wide range of people, whether they're, 14, 13 years old and they're just starting out on things, or they're 70 years old and I'm sharing stories with them. So I felt like I could communicate. So it kind of got me in and into investment management. I went into kind of sales, which was kind of a bit of a natural home. I think if you kind of think like that, you can communicate well, you seem to kind of hold some authority. And that kind of led me into that. And I just went on, I rode that wave. I worked for some of the big investment fund management firms over here in the UK, globally, and done very well. And I toured around the UK helping financial advisors and financial planners put together investment propositions for their clients. So my introduction into financial planning was 15, maybe even longer years ago, when I was working with financial planners, but purely on the investment side of things. Right? And I was fortunate enough to see the good, the bad and the ugly of that. And it helped me shape my views of what not to do, but it also helped me shape my views about the life-changing work that these really good financial planners do on a daily basis. For a number of years, I was kind of harboring the dream that I would be able to do that one day. It felt like a really good next step for me to take. I loved working with people. I felt like I could communicate, and I felt like I could make a big difference to people's lives. And then kind of getting into that, it just snowballed. It was like, well, I'm really interested in people. Go back to the sporting days. I was always interested in the behavioural element of sport. So what made people get in the zone? What made people go, oh, by the way, I've been doing this thing and I can't remember how I done it because I've just literally been in in that zone. And how do people behave around that? So the whole sports psychology mindset element was always something I was hugely interested in. So get into this space and I'm like, well, oh my God, this money thing's pretty emotional, right? I mean, it's been emotional for me as a child and a fan, but this is pretty emotional for people. I'm sitting in front of people as a financial advisor and these couples are crying. What's going on here? I need to understand this a lot better. And so it's really emotional. And then you start dealing with people entering retirement. And you're thinking, oh my God, there's 3 or 4 layers of real psychological, emotional baggage and challenges that these people are trying to kind of work through. I would be doing these people a massive disservice if all I focused on was their money, because I can give them some certainty around their money, but they're absolutely not going to live their life because they're scared of spending it, or they haven't had that conversation with their husband or their wife or their partner to kind of figure out what this is. So all of those layers quickly kind of got me to the point where I was like, I've got to do something about this. And so it took me on a journey of learning really quickly around behaviors and psychology, particularly around couples and spending and what the retirement transition means. And then part of that journey, I'm a feet first kind of guy. Part of that journey was let's just get on a podcast and talk about this, right? Because I don't think enough people are talking about it. So that led to me kind of going, well, let's talk about this stuff. And the name comes from that, really. I feel like a lot of the conversations I have with people is that it's a bit of a battle. It's kind of, I'm a human being over here, and I'm trying to get to this thing called retirement that I've been kind of told about over here. And the bit in between's like really challenging. I'm kind of battling against this thing called retirement. I don't really know how I'm going to win or what it looks like. And so that's where that all come from and that. So I said it was a short version. I'd hate to tell you the long version.
Well, maybe a few beers would engender this. And, I think that's what I love about this experience, and what I hope listeners hear in the theme of listening to this podcast is that most of us did not come to this money work with like, as a little child, I'm going to be a financial professional. There's people that grow up and say, I'm going to be a doctor. I'm going to help people with cancer or whatever they've seen. And usually there's some experience in their life that's, set them on that path to be a doctor. And I don't know about you, Dan. Maybe this next generation will look up to really great financial planners. Their parents will have been great financial planners. And they'll say, you know what, I see how my parent really positively impacted people's lives. I want to do that. And I think culturally, we need really strong, competent, well-rounded financial planners, not people that are sales experts who sell one product, but people that really understand the whole ecosystem of someone's financial life and this big journey that we're all on towards this concept we call retirement and what that even means.
Just one thing I think is really interesting. I think this is and I think that will happen because I think that what we're talking about now is such a modern thing. Even financial advisors that existed 30 years ago were very different to what they are now. Money has evolved and our relationship with money has evolved, I think, so rapidly over the last 10 or 15 years. And I talk about kind of modern retirement. I think people retiring now are first generation, like retirement rebels, as I've called them, right? These are people that are retiring in a way that has never been done before. Our relationship with money is so materially different now because of what a modern society is doing to us. It's a noisy, full on, always on, comparative led world that is now, I think, is really challenging for people. And so our work as human first financial planners and your work as trained financial therapists, I think are going to be as important, like more important than they've ever been. Because if you go back 50 years, it probably wasn't in truth needed, right? People retired on a defined benefit pension that give them a set of income.
Right.
People often lived well below their means back then because the world wasn't as open as it is now.
Right.
You've done more manual labor, so you didn't have the free time. We didn't have a culture of knowledge-based work. So it was kind of manual labor. So I just think the whole thing has shifted quickly. And I do think people will look up to this now going, oh my God, I need financial therapy, financial planning, human first guided planning in my life because I can't deal with this thing by myself because now it is so complicated and interwound into life, right? I think, that I just think it's changed and will change again.
Well, and I think let's add in like the role of technology. I mean, I was just meeting with a couple, and part of what's really stood out to me recently in working with my clients is just how many different accounts they have. And like the cognitive load of keeping track of 7, 10, 12 different accounts at 5 or 6 different institutions, because it's relatively easy to build these financial relationships with other companies all over the place. And then do we have a system to track and keep organized? No. And we don't even get paper records anymore. So we can't do a paper filing. So we've got to figure out how to use some technology solution to help us manage our technological relationship with all these financial institutions and then processing the information. So it's a really big job to help people just be able to slow down and say, I know you feel overwhelmed looking at all these moving pieces. Let's create a roadmap for you. Let's get a system set up where you actually know where all your money's coming in from and where it's going to these different places.
People had one job for their life, right? Now people are retiring with 5 jobs, 6 jobs, with maybe 6 different types of work-based pensions that have been accumulated. They've also read 100 different Twitter feeds and newspapers about the next thing. So they've gone and opened up an account with Vanguard, with Dimensional, with Fidelity, and I'll try that bit there. And I've got a bit of Bitcoin over there, and I've got some gold over there. And go back 50 years, people just worked in one place and saved the way that life has moved on has basically forced people into complexity. And at some point, that complexity is going to catch up with them, right? They're going to go, I can't handle this anymore. How the hell do I sort this out? Because I've got 10 different accounts that I've accumulated over the last 20 years. I have no idea. And it's causing me stress and anxiety because we know that noise and complication causes us to kind of have that. And I think this is the first generation that I've seen. I mean, I talk to my clients about this. One of the questions I ask people is, how did your mum and dad retire? Number one. And how did your grandparents retire? Number two, right?
Yeah.
And so they talk about their grandparents and then they go, well, that was one thing. Talk about their mum and dad. Well, that was slightly different, but not that much different. These are people in their 50s and 60s now. And then they're going, oh my God, I can't even compare this. But I've got like this thing that I'm thinking about, that I know that how I need to retire is literally chalk and cheese, is totally different from what I observed my parents. I've got no reference point for this.
That reference point piece, I think, is so big, right? And that just that psychological concept that we often need reference points to help us be directionally oriented.
Mm-hmm.
And when the reference points are moved, or if we look at our parents' retirement outcome and we're like, ooh, really don't like that, I want something different, we go out into the marketplace of ideas and people and try to find some other target to focus in on. But is it really our true north, or is it that other person's vision? And that becomes part of that psychological journey of, well, what's a meaningful retirement to me, to us? Dan, one of the things that really stood out to me is your ability to sketch. Because as professionals, I think we can get really bogged down in all the complicated ideas and the weeds of retirement planning.
Mm-hmm.
But you have an uncanny ability to simplify complex concepts and ideas into sketches. Can you tell me a little bit about how you got into that and how people can find those sketches so that they can say, you know, I want to better understand, wrap my head around this humans versus retirement thing?
Yeah. This might shock people, but I don't like spreadsheets, and I'm not, I'm not.
Just let that settle in for a minute, folks. Just let that settle in for a minute. A financial planner does not love spreadsheets. And that is actually surprisingly more true than people realize. Absolutely. There's quite a number of us that do not love spreadsheets.
The trouble is, I think and actually kind of without going back again to the story, I've always felt like I'm a pretty simple guy, right? So I will listen to people and go, right, what's the point, right? There might be 100 words, but I've taken out 3 type thing, right? So let's get down to the simplification of this. And so I think one of the challenges that I saw when I first started doing this was when you present spreadsheets, cash flow and numbers to people, they're anchoring themselves on the wrong thing and digging themselves into more complexity. And there's a whole host of reasons why. So kind of I felt like, you're trying to get a point across and you're presenting cash flow and spreadsheets and numbers when in fact my overarching kind of ethos about retirement planning, two things really, is that retirement is more of a human problem than a maths problem. And I've got a sketch that represents that. And also we need to spend less time pressing buttons on a calculator and more time scribing our stories. So those two kind of things that I think make for good retirement, I'm like, well, why would I kind of then bake this in maths and press loads of buttons on a calculator? They're important, right? I'm not suggesting they're not. So what I try to do is kind of say to people, and this just started off by, like any of these things, right? You're kind of trying to explain something to someone and they're going they're not quite getting it. They're not quite understanding it. And through kind of part of my learning around this was I went on a course that basically talked about visual learning, right? And how we as human beings are visual creatures. So we learn better and we take on concepts if we can visually see them and visualize them. So I had this in the back of my mind. I'm talking to this particular couple about kind of retirement, and it was about running out of money. And I just drew this chart and they're not quite getting it. I'm like, you can spend more and I want you to do this. But even though the cash flow was showing that they're never going to run out of money, they were still baking themselves and anchoring themselves in some certain things. So I drew this thing. It was kind of like it was a graph and it had the net worth going up, and I put a coffin at the end of it, and I just put an arrow and I put like, what are you waiting for? Kind of against the net worth, right? And I was just like, and they were like, oh, right. So it's kind of like, I've been saying these words to you for the last 5 minutes, but now I've drawn an actual coffin and basically gone, you'll be here and your net worth is there. Why are you procrastinating? What are you waiting for? And it's just hit home. So I was like, oh, right, I've got to do more of this stuff. So look, I'm no Banksy or no artist, but I literally just get on my little Remarkable. And I'm like, if I hear a concept or I talk about a concept, I'll try and sketch it. So the Humans vs. Retirement website has now got 50 sketches that is on there that is free for anyone to kind of go on and look at and download a PDF, and you can get them. And they're just things that I've just kind of either thought about, spoken about, read about, and I think that are better visualized in terms of being able to speak. So one thing I will say for anybody listening is that if we can just sketch out, doesn't matter how good they are, sketch out a concept, even to our partner or our spouse. If we're having a conversation about money to our partners or our spouse, like just draw it, put it visually down, because we do take that information in better than words, graphs, and charts.
Dan, this just blew my mind, because I just got so much the deeper layer of why you're doing this. So, at first, as you started telling us, I was like, oh yeah, humans used to communicate through hieroglyphics, right? Like literally drawing pictures on the walls, and that's how people communicated. But then what was even more powerful is I was listening to your story and I was thinking, like, in my therapist brain, like, okay, I've got this couple who isn't comfortable spending their money down, but there's clearly enough money there. The financial planner looks at the spreadsheet and says, okay, high probability of success, plenty of money. They need to increase their spending. And this happens a lot in the world of financial planning, which still kind of bends my mind, right? Is most of the world is worried about, will I ever have enough? How do I accumulate enough? But when you talk to financial planners in that community, the population of people that are attracted are the people that have accumulated usually a good bit of money, but they're not always comfortable spending it down. My financial therapist brain was like, oh, well, I wonder what their family of origin messages were around money and spending. And let's start processing that. And what was your family retirement experiences like? And how is that shaping why you feel comfortable or not comfortable around it, right? And all these questions that I can start to use to try to get them to open their minds. And what you just described, and I can imagine, is like one's very simple graphical image and the light bulb clicked. And so I'm curious, did you see this couple then get more comfortable with spending more of their money in alignment with who they are?
Yeah. I mean, the story goes in a way that they actually started giving away money. So not spending it on so they actually opened up kind of to more giving to their children while they were alive. That was kind of the crux of the conversation. And one of the sayings that I use around that is I say to people, surely you'd like to give your money away with a warm heart, not a cold hand, right? Surely you don't want this to be like post-death. They're like, oh no, why? So you come up with the reasons why it's great for both the giver and the person receiving to give money away. You get to see the benefit of the gift and the impact. So it was that kind of, and that's kind of why I drew that thing. You're going to end up with your net worth increasing. You're going to end up in a box, and you've missed out on the opportunity to impact the people that you love because you're worried about running out of money, and you're not going to. And they started to give some money. And interestingly, what it actually spurred more than that, they actually started giving items that so their will had certain items of jewelry that the wife wanted to leave to her daughter. And what she then did, and they really downloaded on me in a meeting a year or so ago, and got really emotional with it. They were like, what am I waiting for? Like, so it's not just a money thing. I've got this beautiful ring that it was my mother's and was my grandmother's that I know that my daughter will have. My daughter absolutely loves it. I will never wear it, but it was kind of just going to be passed down on death. I've give it to her now, and I want her to wear it. So they become much more open to kind of, that kind of like giving while they're alive, seeing things happen, helping their children. They have spent a bit more money on things. But again, I suppose what I will stress is that it's not kind of all solved by a sketch, right? It's not kind of like do one sketch, off they go. It creates it creates that spark that then I think what really good financial professionals do is that they hold on to that spark and they go, let's kind of stay there. And next time we meet, I'm going to remind you of that. And I'll send you a picture of the sketch. So print it out, or I'll print one out. Let's just keep gently nudging. And I think, one thing also I will say is I think it's really, really important about how we start talking to people around this, Ed. And I know you're a massive proponent of kind of language, right? So when it comes to the way that we frame things, I think it, particularly in a modern world around money, has such an impact, and it can kind of mean the same thing. So when it comes to probability of success, I want to start framing that like probability of overspending and underspending, right? So I think the trouble is when we start talking to people about spending their money in retirement, if I say to them, oh, by the way, you've got a 70% probability of success, what they're really hearing is I've got a 30% probability of failure. That's what they're hearing. And that doesn't sit well, right?
Right.
If we readjust that one level and we go, oh, by the way, you've got a 30% probability of future adjustments that are needed. Well, that sounds okay. Right. So this is not success or failure. People see retirement as success or failure. And
binary,
I think
black and white.
Oh, absolutely. I'm either going to like literally run out of money or I'm going to die with two. Like it's this probably success or failure, right? But actually, if we kind of frame it like going forward, you're going to need some adjustments to your spending or to your income levels. That's cool. And then if we kind of go again further and go, well, by the way, actually, even at 50%, right? If we do like this Monte Carlo analysis and all this stuff, you've got a 50% chance that you're still going to overspend in retirement.
Right.
There's not a 50% chance of that's like, there's not a 50% chance of failure. There's still a 50% chance that you are going to overspend in retirement. Now, I'm not saying we kind of instantly take all that and go, well, spend loads of money. But I think we need to realize, as I said, this money thing's moved on, and the way that we communicate the outcomes of the planning work that we do can have a material impact on people. And I fell into that trap early on. You're communicating people, by the way, there's a 70% chance of success in your plan. You're very comfortable as a planner with that, and they're still not spending any money. And you're going, why the hell is this not happening? They've heard it wrong. And I think we can reframe that and talk about that very, very differently.
Dan, there's a lot of richness there. And I want to, what's playing in the background that maybe many listeners don't know is that financial planners use a modeling approach called Monte Carlo simulation to understand your probability of success. And that's what we're really talking about.
Yeah.
And maybe your financial planners talked to you about it. Maybe they haven't. But I think what I want listeners to really pick up on is if what your financial planner is communicating to you causes you distress, you need to let them know, because there's likely a misunderstanding between what they're trying to communicate and what you're hearing. And as humans, we're more likely to hear, I think, especially around money, negative messages.
100%.
Right? Whether that's what the financial planner is actually doing may not be the case. So we have to, this is that deeper psychology. We've got to kind of test or challenge our reality or our assumptions.
Yeah.
And make sure and say, hey, do I need to be concerned about my spending or not based on what you've just said? Because what we know as planners is you're going to make some interpretation about what this means for you. On the other side, as financial planners, what we need to be thoughtful of is what meaning are you giving to what I just shared? Right? Instead of assuming we know that you've taken the same meaning that I have about it, is being curious, what have you just heard me describe? What do you think this means for your life? And then clients, you got to share that back. And so this is that powerful relationship between the professional and the clients. And it takes a collaborative approach, not I'm on high, I'm the financial planner, I know everything. I'm the client, I just have to trust you. There's some folks that are like that. Of course, I know there's other people that are, like, well, I know everything. What's the financial planner going to tell me? And, that's a different conversation perhaps. But Dan, I also want to go back and say, I think you caught my own little, I'll use a therapy word, magical thinking around the sketches. And you're like, Ed, just remember, it's not like that sketch was seen one time and then one and done, voila, they're comfortable. It's what I heard you say back to me was more, Ed, that sketch was a really powerful seed for them. And we kept bringing it back up and we would talk about it and we would probably ask other questions around the meaning. And in relationship and over time, they became more comfortable with passing on the jewelry, the family heirloom. They became more comfortable. And that's really familiar to me as a therapist, because that's kind of how we're trained to think about things is we're planting seeds all the time. And we know that some will take longer to germinate than others, but we're trusting that just being in a healthy, honest, empathic, and caring relationship, the fruits will bear in time.
Yep.
And we can't fully predict when, but if we're putting the right seeds down and we're doing it from a place of honesty and integrity and compassion and in the best interest of the client, not in what's best for us, it'll take root.
Do you know what? One of the things I will say is that I think, like other things that therapists deal with, we have to all appreciate as planners, as humans, as people that are working, the general public, anyone really. Money is a deep-rooted problem, right? This is not a superficial thing. So if we think that, and particularly with people I work with that enter into retirement, I'm having to work with 30 years of kind of like preloaded habits, right? So I have to recognize, so it's a bit like a couple coming in for marriage therapy after 30 years saying our marriage is on the rocks, right? You are not going to save that marriage in one meeting. There's 30 years of stuff to unpick here before we even kind of get to it. I view money the same, right? It's kind of, that's why I think it has to be a really collaborative approach to understanding some of the roots of some of the issues, because money goes as deep as anything in our psychological being. So that's why I think that presenting cash flow as a financial plan and going, you're okay, aren't you, doesn't work. Presenting a sketch doesn't work. Going a framework around income, they're all great, but they're all, as you said, seeds to further conversations, to further things. And actually realizing that, and my great friend Roger Whitney said this, that realizing that there are certain problems in the world that are complicated and there are certain problems in the world that are complex. Complicated problems can be solved by a solution. Complex problems basically are never solved. By their sheer nature, they're very complex, right? I think money is a complex problem, and it's not a complicated problem that's solved with a widget. It's a complex problem that needs continuously readjustment and seeds planted. And certain people get it at certain times and it takes a bit longer for other people. But that's why therapy and money kind of all fit in an amazing sphere, because it comes under the same banner, right?
I think so. And I think this is where some of where you're headed too, is Dan, is a lot of us have this idea that if we have the right retirement accounts and the right investments and the right tax strategy and the right cash flow projection, that then we'll feel financially secure. If I just,
we're good.
If I buy this financial instrument or product, an annuity product, life insurance policy, a disability policy, all of those things are needed to develop a good financial life. But they are not necessarily going to give you the psychological peace of mind that you need until you look at, how do I relate to money? How do I experience it? How do my memories of money shape what I expect? Mm-hmm. Because, to your point, right, it's like, okay, I can run you through a cash flow and say, you're going to be perfectly fine. But if I haven't accounted for the fact that when you were 10, your dad died and there was no life insurance and your mom had to go back to work and your housing went down, and forever since you felt scared about running out of money, I can run cash flow projections till I'm blue in the face and tell you that it's not a rational problem. It's an emotional experience-based problem. And we've got to talk and work through that and help your mind, brain, and body recognize that pain is over and past. You're relatively secure now.
Absolutely. Like, I think one of the things that I firmly believe in, that, and it goes a bit deeper than this, but as a very high level, there are two things that people need to figure out in retirement. One, what are they going to do with their time? And number two, how are they going to pay for it? And actually, you can't figure out number two until you figured out number one. Right. So, so a lot of people will start with number two. They go, how much money can I take out of, I've got these retirement accounts. What's the income? Well, actually, it doesn't matter. I mean, it doesn't matter about the income, right? Until you figure out what exactly you want to do with your life. And what you want to do with your life has implications about who you were, who you are now, and who you want to be in the future. So we need to kind of 360 degree this and figure out those kind of elements that can allow us then to kind of actually meaningfully connect your money to your meaning. And I'm a big believer, if your money doesn't have a job or purpose, then you will never use it for the good that it should be used for. if it's just sitting there, you need to connect your money with meaning, connect it with specific jobs, connect it with specific experiences, connect it with specific gifts. Give your money as many jobs as it possibly can, because that will allow us to really connect it with a certain thing. And until you figure out, as I said, who you are now, who you want to be, and understand how you want to spend your time, no cash flow projection is ever going to make your retirement fulfilling, because it's just you're not going to allow yourself to experience the money that in a way that you should do.
So Dan, speaking of all of this and retirement, you have a really unique position. You have an international perspective on retirement. You have the perspective of what happens in the UK. Mm-hmm. You have enough perspective on the US retirement system and the mentality. Can you help listeners compare and contrast the differences and the similarities between the UK globally and the US globally perspectives on retirement, and what's at place that may be contributing to some of that?
Yeah. There's definitely similarities and definitely differences, right? I mean, there's a lot of similarities around, I think, some of the foundational non-financial stuff. So around identity and purpose. Most societies that have got a kind of a modern day retirement have the same thing. So we look at kind of Western sides, UK, America, Australia, South Africa, where there is kind of knowledge-based work that people are retiring reasonably early, and there's some longevity to life, right? So there's obviously challenges around what am I retiring to, and who am I once I lose the business card and I lose the suit, and I've been Dan the financial planner. I'm now just like, who the hell am I now that I'm not Dan the financial planner? So there's definitely, I think, that bit. What's really interesting, I think some of this drives, so in the UK, we've got something called the National Health Service, the NHS, which is kind of a government funded kind of healthcare system. So we are fortunate in that a big portion of our lifetime medical care is taken care of, right? We don't have to fund this stuff.
Like you don't worry about getting healthcare for yourself and how am I going to pay for it? Like that's not a part of the collective thought is, if I have a heart attack, I'll go to the hospital, I'll get the care I need, and my bill I know will be very manageable for me.
Yeah, but there's no bill.
Wait.
Like, there's no bill.
I mean, I knew that, but I'm just hearing it so on this podcast right now. Right?
Yeah,
that's
no bill.
Like just mic dropping for me. Okay, I'm good. Let's keep going.
Yes. And so there's a lot of people that moan in this country about the NHS, right? Because they're under pressure, because they're funded by the government, they're funded by taxpayers, and there's lots of people in the country and the service levels have gone down. But ultimately, if you're really poorly, you get free treatment on the NHS, right? The, like ER units over here called A&E, so accident emergency. If I go and play, I don't know, I'll go and play a sport at the weekend and I break my leg, I turn up to A&E and I get my leg fixed, right? And I get rehab and I get everything and I don't pay a bean, right? That's kind of...
You're not even worried about it.
No.
And this is what's just so mind-bending for me is literally my son fell off the monkey bars, I don't know, 4 weeks ago. And I was like, well, how much is this going to cost? I have no idea. And even though we have insurance, we have money, we have emergency funds, we have all the technical right things. Immediately my conscience is like, well, do we go get him care? Maybe we just need to wait and see.
Yeah.
Right. But it's so that impact of like, I don't even know how much this thing is going to cost me. Yeah. And you guys are like, I'm hurt. I go to the doctor. I get care.
Yeah, absolutely. Like my daughter years ago, I think it was about 8 or 9 years ago, we were due to fly to Disney in the August to go on our first holiday to Disney. And the start of July, she broke her leg. And so we had to cancel Disney. But the story is she broke her leg and we went and got her leg fixed and plastered up, and we got a wheelchair, and she went back for therapy, like rehab, and it didn't cost a thing, right? It's kind of like bang, 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 done. There's no worry. A lot of people there is private medical over here, absolutely. So you can go so the NHS has long waiting lists. So if you do need a particular operation, let's just say in retirement, and I've got people that do this, you need your knee scoped out, or you need a new knee and all that stuff. You might have to wait 12 months to get that done if you want it done free, because there is kind of pressure and waiting lists. So what a lot of people will do is, you can either buy private medical insurance, so you can pay a monthly fee to get the insurance to allow you to jump the queues and go and get that private cover, that private care. Or you can just pay for the thing. You can phone up a private medical facility and you can go, how much is it for a new knee? And I'll pay for it. So the trade-off in retirement for a lot of people over here is, do I have some cash buffer to make sure that I can have the stuff that I need done in order for me to live life now? Example being, I had a client come in the other day who's had her knee done, and she paid for it because the waiting list was 12 months. And she was like, actually, that'd be 12 months of hell and I won't be able to live retirement properly. So I've got the money. I'm going to get it done sooner. So that's one big thing, right? This kind of emergency fund that's absolutely needed for kind of health is not quite there. And then the other bit is kind of care. So there is kind of care facilities that you can go into that doesn't cost anything. But they're not the greatest. And people would like to maybe have a bit more dignity and independence in later life and have something a bit better. So you can, that's a bit of a consideration. So I think health is kind of one of the big things over here where there is a level of kind of immediate care that you have if you have kind of real bad problems, that you don't have to feel like, like you say, you don't delay it or you don't worry about it because you're worried about the cost of it. You just go get it done and see your doctors and go to the hospital.
So that's the healthcare system. And it's just, for listeners that are living in the US, it's not going to change a whole lot for you probably. But it's just about that bigger consciousness around that there are different ways that societies organize themselves. And so we just let that be. But the other thing that you shared that's really interesting is around the inheritance tax. And so can you talk a little bit about what that looks like?
Yeah. So I'll just wrap up one thing on the healthcare thing. I think it doesn't mean that we don't over here still kind of save for healthcare. I just think it's so much more in focus over your side of the pond, right? So there's still that. Inheritance tax, really interesting. So we have quite a penal inheritance tax system over here in that each individual only has £325,000. What's that? $400,000 maybe of free money when they die. So the beneficiaries only have that. So there are some other things that you can get. So you get an extra £175,000 of inheritance tax wiggle room if you leave your house to your direct descendant, right? So if you've got a house and you leave it to your son or daughter or your grandchildren, then ultimately as an individual, you'll have £500,000 before you pay an inheritance tax. But your house is part of that, right? Your house valuation is part of that. Anything over £500,000, you'll pay 40% tax on. So that's an individual, right? So ultimately, as a couple, because inheritance tax is due on second death, and the surviving spouse will inherit free of tax anything, right? So it's due on second death. So basically, a couple will have £1 million. So a lot of planning work over here is to try and make sure that people don't leave much above £1 million at the end of their life. And it's one of those things. Inheritance tax is talked about a lot over here because it's like, well, I've paid tax kind of in my life. I'm paying tax while I'm taking it out. And then you're going to tax the thing at the end anyway for the beneficiaries. And by the way, the beneficiaries can't get their hands on any of the assets that I've left behind until they've paid the tax bill. So if there's like a £300,000 tax bill, that tax bill needs to be paid before the assets are released to the beneficiaries. And that can cause a lot of problems for a lot of people. So there is a real mentality around planning for that inheritance tax. So spending and giving during your lifetime is much more, I think, more talked about in a way that does involve like tax planning as much as kind of like life desires and goals. Because it is quite penal, right? I mean, and then that 325,000 tapers down anything above 2 million. So if someone's got like a £5 million estate, they won't have any inheritance tax free room. They'll pay 40% on £5 million.
Oh, interesting. So the bigger the estate, the sooner it sets in.
Yeah. The bigger the estate, the less money you get, right? So there's a lot of conversations in later life around inheritance tax planning and giving money away and making sure that everything's in play. And I think obviously that's materially different to the States because there's a much higher threshold in there.
Wow. Dan, so appreciate the whole arc of this conversation. We started out with you sharing that, I thought I was going to be in sports. I was a sportsman and cricket and golf to some extent. And then life took you another path and you got really into the investment world, and which led to more of the personal finance and working with people. And really now being this leader in the conversations around humans versus retirement, this is an unending conversation. I think you said during our talk, it's not talked about enough. And so if people want to connect with you and the work you're doing, what's the best way for them to find you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn and Twitter or X. I've no idea what it's called now. I still call it Twitter. I still call it Twitter and I still tweet. So here's what it is.
Okay.
I'm on X or Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn. Just Dan Haylett. Search me. You'll see me. Connect with me. The Humans versus Retirement website is humans versus, so humans vs retirement.com. Yeah. And that's where all of my podcasts will sit. And you can go and have a look at. They're available on Apple and Spotify and all of that stuff, as well as my sketches and my writing. And I send out a weekly email on a Sunday morning over UK time. So 9:00 over a coffee UK time. And that's called the Super Sunday Retirement Roundup, which I just try and send some really hard hitting, truthful messages about retirement. And again, just trying to get reality out there. As I said before, this is people are entering into something that no one really has any real experience about, because we haven't got anyone to really look up to about what this modern retirement thing is. So I think we're all just trying to figure this thing out together. I've probably got a little bit more basis for this because I'm trying to work with people on a daily basis and I'm hearing things. And it's just trying to get it out there and share some of this stuff to try and help people live because I think it is, I think, one of the, if not the most important phase. I talk about, it's the first time, I think, since childhood that you can be ultimately free to be curious about what life means. You've kind of work, children, marriage, whatever your life has given you since childhood has probably done some things to you in terms of depressed some dreams or made you get on a hamster wheel that you didn't want to get onto and all of that stuff. And for the first time, you can now explore the world be curious, explore the world. And it's a really important time to plan and think about and what it looks like and live. So
I love that. And Dan, I do want to highlight, one of the things that you said is first generation retirement rebels. I love that. And, I think, Dan, you raised one last point that I want to highlight as we exit this is we're the same age. We're in our 40s, I think. And so you're not living retired, but you work with a lot of people that are approaching the conversation, just entered and have been in it for a while. And that gives you a wide perspective on the range of ways people go through it. And I think that's the thing I want listeners to really know is that's where any of our guests, it's that data, like you only live through retirement once as a listener. But Dan, you live in retirement on Groundhog's Day. You're living vicariously through a lot of different people's retirement. And so you got a lot of data about how it plays out and where people really flourish and thrive in retirement and where people kind of struggle in that transition. And that's really the heart is, hey, you've lived this awesome, incredible life. Yeah, you've had your bumps and bruises and challenges. You're at this retirement point. Like, let's make the most of it. Let's return to that childlike wonder. And I love that that's where we're ending this conversation is retirement can be a chance to return to that childlike wonder and re-pursue meaningful things now that some of the other constraints of adult life have likely faded away from you. So Dan, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
It's been a great conversation, Ed. Thank you so much for having me on.
I invite you now to stop for 5 or 10 minutes and reflect on what you just heard. Maybe even journal about it. Give yourself the time to consider what you just heard and what it means to you. By giving yourself the time to reflect and integrate what you just heard, it will help you along your journey of learning, healing, and growing towards financial intimacy in your life. Please like and follow this podcast and share with someone that would benefit from being on the journey of financial intimacy. Wishing you healthy love and money, Ed.